I took as my cue in the paper that you have there the phrase around the opportunities, hurdles over the next 10 years. And as much as I tried, I couldn't find a way to introduce the idea of ShamWow into my thoughts, but perhaps I'll get there by the end. No, but I did. I took that as my cue, and I thought about then the current context. And I'm not talking here about community foundations or community foundations of Canada, just talking more broadly about my observations, what's happening in the space that most of us touch in some way or another, in very different ways, clearly around the table. But I don't want to define that too closely. Everyone finds their own way into it, and the organizations find their own way into it. Citizens clearly do, governments do, private sector. And so the primary observations I would make is that in the current context, we are remarkably good at determining ways of operating. And we innovate like crazy within that framework. I mean, we just heard, Don just took us through the latest of his tax measures, strategies, innovations to free up new ways to operate, more resources if that was to come about. Imagine's done the same thing on the stretch, and you can unpack all that. Nora did the same thing. She took us through the ideas around holding companies that would free up organizations to focus on mission, to not get distracted by social enterprise or to pursue them when necessary. We're remarkably good at determining the right fee structures or the wrong ones, but in fixing them, at how we grant, how we don't grant, how we operate a program. Some of the most innovative people, the YMCAs and Big Brothers. I mean, Canadians are remarkably good at this, using civil society organizations to operate effectively, largely focused on public goods. And that list is incredibly long. And my experience so far in kind of spending more time directly involved in this, although the sports stuff always felt like we were somewhere on the margins, but directly involved is I feel as if that frame will serve us fairly well. We will be good, as we have been for decades, at enabling Canadians to express themselves through a variety of actions, whether it's sort of traditional forms of philanthropy or new forms of social innovation, or whether it's through traditional organizations or new networks, or that we will have and will continue to refine and make better all the parts that are about operating and how we go about that, how we govern, how we price fair market value on new things, all that stuff. I feel supremely confident, in fact, that the institutions like the one we're in right now will train students to be effective working in that paradigm. I feel really confident that we will have the right kind of relationships amongst the academy, amongst governments, amongst the private sector, amongst ourselves within that paradigm. I think we should take it as a huge vote of confidence that we have created this, that Canadians have created this over decades. It's a remarkable thing if you really step back and look at it. Like, look what's happened. There were choices made along the way. Leaders took actions along the way. Different things happened that allowed for this diverse ecosystem to grow. Who knew? And you travel to other parts of the world, and it becomes stark in comparison, of course, because you see it doesn't exist everywhere. So the primary message is good for us, ShamWow, right? So, the obvious place I'm going is there's another side to this that I want to explore and unpack, and it's in counterpose to ways of operating, or even ways of governing. It's sort of the same thing, and it's ways of thinking. And I would primarily frame the way of thinking that I think is missing is the frame of abundance, that we carry around in how we think in this space the opposite. We intuitively believe that we don't have what's needed. We somehow, in almost everything we say underneath it, there's a belief system or a way of thinking that's embedded with scarcity. and what we don't have. And so almost all of our actions in the paradigm of how we operate, ways of operating, are about addressing that, addressing what we don't have. And so we consistently create supply or product or services or new things to come up with what we think we don't have. But I would argue that, and I believe that's all good. That's why I say, like, I have supreme confidence that in that paradigm of ways of operating, we will continue to do that. And we will cultivate the kinds of things we do need. We should do it. Let's get the stretch tax credit in place. Let's free up more capital. Let's promote social enterprise. Let's do all that. It's not an either or. In fact, that's part of the abundance framework. They aren't trade-offs. It's not zero-sum. By excelling in new ways of thinking, we don't give up innovations and new ways of operating. So the primary mode of thinking that we need to cultivate, and I think it's supremely important here with a new school, is how do you train new leaders, new operators to work in a way of thinking that assumes abundance, that can identify what we do have and put it to work in different ways, that can let go of some of the scars of scarcity, can let go of some of the experience of having less, which has been a kind of dominant experience since the mid-90s, that a number of leaders have gone through, and so it's quite natural to feel that, right? But a new generation of leaders hasn't had that experience. And I say that quite purposefully. I didn't have that experience, and I landed in a place in the sports sector at a time when a certain group of people, for a period of time, just shed this view. And so my kind of mentorship and support came about in a way where what I saw were all the resources that were required to do some things in the work that we sought to do, and to hold on to pretty robust aspirations. So I think that this connection between a way of thinking that's about abundance directly ties to leadership. And I would say that this is a significant challenge. If new ways of thinking around abundance is actually a new paradigm, it's hard to let go of the other paradigm and get into the new paradigm, then the primary requirement, so the job one, is leaders that can learn to lead that way, that can see what we do have and not we don't have. And quite interestingly, it changes the way you think about philanthropy, not as a gift from one that has to someone that hasn't. You just don't think of it that way. You think of, in a framework of abundance, you think of sharing. You think of the connection between assets. You think of what each of us brings and then the impact, the public good that could be acquired from it. And that, again, changes the way we look at our work. It changes the way we relate. I mean, the language that governments have chosen to use around recipient, right, and gift, and all this language feeds that way of operating framework. It just sits so nicely in there, but it doesn't allow, or in some ways it gets in the way of a different way of thinking in which those relationships are more complex. And because they're more complex, they'll open up new opportunities for us. So if we can cultivate new ways of thinking, and if we can cultivate leaders that can operate in a way where the assumption is around abundance, then I think the next thing that comes from this is another thing that I think is missing, and it's confidence. And I'm going to use just the story of the political shenanigans of the last little while, where it was rhetorical devices to sort of put upon the sector a perspective. And so that the political rhetoric was just that. I mean, I think it was Minister Kent had something to say on CBC, right, about the nature of foundations and others operating in the space. And I know my first reaction was, give me a break, and then and that sort of reaction in the ways of operating framework would be one of, doesn't he appreciate all the good work we do, the funds we steward, the doesn't recognize that this is part of democracy, and immediately sort of a response in that frame that was created in the moment in which the political rhetoric came out. And it took me quite a while to let that go. But to step back and go, actually, if I'm thinking in a different way, and with a sense of confidence, what it made me think was, oh, we've arrived right where we wanted to be. For all those years, through all the 90s, when all that work and all that leadership was going on, all the innovation was happening, new opportunities, new relationships with governments, it broke down, it changes, all that was going on. In that moment, I kind of thought, oh, this is what we always anticipated would come. Because if the civil society, nonprofits, charities, foundations have arrived at a place where there's a mature kind of relationship with government, if there's a sort of force in society that can recognize abundance, has leadership, and a sense of confidence, then when you experience that, what you come away with is a sense of, oh yeah, that's just the normal course of business. Just like any other sort of domain in society, if you're having a significant impact on what's going on in the world, if you're a participant and have strong ideas, then you'll become part of that political rhetoric. You become part of that political discussion. And in a way, now it's no fun being in the direct firing line, we weren't. But you just take it on board in a different way. You take it on board with the confidence of, oh yeah, we won't always dominate the public realm. We won't always dominate the political discourse. There'll be times when we'll be in the middle of it. And then there'll be other times when we come back and we're collaborative. But the point is that it's rare for us to assume the confidence, because I think we've lived in a world of scarcity, and I think we've lived in a world in which leadership was about how to be innovative and how we operated. And we can add, we can supplement, we can bring something else to the table. So my last thought then, if I thought that new ways of thinking was about abundance, was about leadership, was about confidence, the last piece is, and pick your word, but it's about aggregation, or it's about integration, it's about connection, it's about together, and the ability to do our work in concert. And that is not about an operating frame. It's not about the individual organization. It's not about the individual leader. It's a system of leadership. It's a way in which we learn to bring things together. And it's very difficult. But I really see it. It's sort of the organizing principle for our work now at CFC is how can we achieve things together and with others? Not to what end, yes, but how. Actually, how do you go about enabling that to happen? It's a very difficult thing to do. But with a new way of thinking, and with a belief system around abundance, not scarcity, it becomes easier. With leaders who are prepared to work in that way, it becomes easier. And with a sense of confidence, it becomes easier. My connection with you isn't a trade-off in some way. So that's, in a sense, it's sort of one observation. It's that we can create another paradigm, another frame, another way of thinking to supplement all the innovation and great work that's gone on in ways of operating. And if so, I suggest we're better prepared to address the opportunities and hurdles over the next 10 years. Thank you.